Dawn in Salem always brought a mystical aura, especially around the old converted church that now served as St. Catherine's home. Emily Sullivan, as she did every morning, walked silently through the lavender garden, her fingers gently brushing the fragrant flowers as she followed her usual path. Dew still rested on the petals, and the shy sun began to gild the ancient stone walls that had long been her home. At 24, Emily carried a serenity that seemed to come from another era. Her long brown hair, always tied in a discreet bun, and her honey-colored eyes that seemed to hold secrets of past lives, gave her an ethereal, almost supernatural beauty. On that specific morning, as she watered the lavender, something in the air seemed different, a subtle restlessness, like the foretelling of a still distant storm. "Emily, dear," Aunt Martha's voice echoed through the garden. "Come, there's something I need to show you." Emily carefully set down the watering can and headed to the entrance of the church, where her aunt waited with an envelope in her hands. The paper was thick, yellowed, with an embossed crest she had never seen before. "It's from Blackwood Manor," Martha explained, her voice betraying a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. "They're requesting your services as a musician." The name Blackwood made Emily shiver imperceptibly. Even though she had grown up in the town, that name had always been whispered, laden with dark stories and ancient tragedies. The manor, situated at the highest point of the hill, had remained closed for decades, its dark windows like empty eyes observing the town below. "But why?" asked Emily, her voice as soft as always, while her fingers gently touched the envelope. Apparently, they found some old sheet music in the manor's library, compositions by Beatrice Blackwood. Aunt Martha made the sign of the cross when mentioning that name. "They need someone who can decipher them, and you're the only one in the region with sufficient knowledge of ancient music." Emily carefully opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the words written in an elegant and firm handwriting. The letter was signed by Daniel Blackwood, a name that made her heart race without her understanding why. "The heir has returned," continued Martha, lowering her voice. "After all these years, no one knows exactly why. Some say he seeks redemption, others that he plans to sell everything. But whatever the reason, he's offering generous payment for your services." Emily reread the letter, feeling the weight of the decision on her shoulders. The money would be welcome for the home, always needing resources to care for the children. Besides, something about that proposal intrigued her deeply. Beatrice Blackwood was an almost mythical figure in the town's history, a woman who had lived cloistered for love and found in music her only form of expression. "Does Uncle Joseph know about this?" asked Emily, well aware of her uncle's protective and sometimes inflexible nature. "Yes, we talked during the night. He hesitated at first, but agreed it would be a unique opportunity. Besides," Martha hesitated for a moment, "perhaps it's time for you to know a little more of the world beyond these walls." Her aunt's words touched something deep inside Emily. It was true that her life, though serene and meaningful, sometimes seemed too small for the dreams she kept secret. The music lessons for the orphaned children, the embroidery of liturgical garments, the daily prayers, all this filled her days, but not completely her soul. "When should I start?" she asked, already knowing in her heart that she would accept. "Tomorrow morning. Mr. Blackwood will send a car to pick you up." Martha gently touched her niece's face. "Just be careful, my dear. That manor holds many stories, not all of them good." The rest of the day passed like a foggy dream. Emily performed her usual tasks, taught the children to play Ave Maria on the small chapel organ, embroidered golden branches on a new stole, helped in the kitchen. But her thoughts kept returning to the manor on the hill, to the mysterious sheet music, to the name Blackwood that seemed to whisper promises and warnings. At night in her simple room, Emily opened the window and contemplated the full moon bathing the valley in silver light. In the distance, almost hidden among the shadows of the cypress trees, Blackwood Manor loomed like a sleeping giant. For a moment, she thought she saw a light in one of the upper windows, but soon convinced herself it was merely the reflection of the moonlight. As she prepared for bed, her fingers found the old medallion she always carried with her, the only memento of her parents, who died when she was very young. Inside it, a Latin inscription spoke of destiny and courage. Emily had never fully understood its meaning, but that night, the word seemed especially significant. Dawn came too quickly. Emily chose her most appropriate dress, a simple model in light blue tones which her aunt always said matched her serene nature. She tied her hair as usual, but left a few locks framing her face. She wore no makeup, just a touch of balm on her lips. Precisely. At 8 o'clock, a black car gleaming like onyx crossed the gates of St. Catherine's. The driver, a middle-aged man with an impassive expression, opened the rear door without saying a word. Emily said goodbye to her aunt and uncle with a restrained embrace, promising to return before nightfall. The journey to the manor was silent. The road wound up the hill, passing centuries-old oak trees and abandoned vineyards. As they climbed, the air became denser, as if laden with secrets. Emily kept her hands crossed on her lap, watching the familiar landscape transform into something almost foreign under this new perspective. Finally, the car passed through the huge iron gates of the Blackwood property. The garden, once famous for its beauty, was now half wild, with tangled rose bushes and statues partially covered by ivy. The manor itself was even more imposing up close, a 19th-century neoclassical construction with majestic columns and a marble staircase leading to the main entrance. Emily got out of the car feeling her heart beating faster. The driver indicated that she should climb the stairs, where a housekeeper was already waiting for her. Each step seemed to take her deeper into a different world from her own, a world of mysteries and unexplored possibilities. The housekeeper, a grey-haired lady with a rigid posture, introduced herself as Mrs. Victoria. Her gaze assessed Emily from head to toe, lingering for a moment on the medallion around her neck. "Mr. Blackwood is waiting for you in the library," she announced, turning on her heels and beginning to walk through the manor's corridors. Emily followed her, her steps echoing on the marble floor. The walls were covered with old portraits, generations of Blackwoods who seemed to observe her with painted eyes that were strangely alive. Heavy red velvet curtains filtered the sunlight, creating dancing shadows in the corners. The library was on the second floor, at the end of a long corridor. Mrs. Victoria stopped before a double-carved oak door and knocked 3 times. A deep voice responded from within, and Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "Enter," said the housekeeper, opening the door and stepping aside. Emily crossed the threshold and was immediately enveloped by the unique atmosphere of that place. The library was circular, with shelves that went from floor to ceiling, all filled with old books. A spiral staircase of wrought iron allowed access to the upper levels. Tall windows let in beams of light that danced on the dust suspended in the air. And then she saw him. Daniel Blackwood stood by one of the windows, his silhouette cut against the morning light. He was younger than she expected. He couldn't be more than 40, but there was something in his posture that suggested the weight of centuries. When he turned to face her, Emily felt the air escape from her lungs. His eyes were of an intense, dark green, almost black under certain lights, and seemed to carry too many stories for a single life. His face had aristocratic features, well-defined jawline, straight nose, firm lips, but it was the expression in his gaze that truly captured attention, a mixture of melancholy and strength that Emily had never encountered before. "Miss Dew. Sullivan?" His voice was deep with a slight accent that suggested years lived abroad. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor." Emily made a small curtsy as she had been taught. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Blackwood. Please sit down." He indicated a leather armchair near an antique desk, on which several sheet music pages yellowed. By time was spread. Emily obeyed, feeling the weight of his gaze upon her. Daniel remained standing, his hands crossed behind his back as if he needed to maintain a safe distance. "I believe you have already been informed about the nature of the work," he began, his voice controlled but with an underlying tension. "These scores were composed by my great-aunt Beatrice Blackwood during her confinement in this house." Emily nodded gently. "Yes, I've heard stories about her. They say she was an extraordinary musician." A bitter smile touched Daniel's lips. "And they also say she went mad for love, isn't that right? Stories have long legs in this town." There was an awkward moment of silence. Emily could feel that she had touched on a sensitive subject, but something compelled her to continue. "Stories don't always tell the whole truth," she said softly. Sometimes you need to hear the music to understand the composer. Daniel looked at her with renewed intensity, as if seeing her truly for the first time. He approached the desk and carefully picked up one of the scores. "This is the first piece we found," he explained, extending the paper to her. "The handwriting is peculiar. None of the experts I consulted could decipher it completely." Emily took the score with reverence. At first glance, the notes seemed to dance across the page in a chaotic manner, but gradually a pattern began to emerge. It was as if Beatrice had developed her own musical language, a unique way of expressing what words could not say. "May I?" she asked, indicating the grand piano that occupied a corner of the library. Daniel made a gesture of assent, and Emily rose, taking the score with her. As she sat at the piano, she felt an immediate connection with the instrument. Its yellowish ivory keys told stories of hands that had played there before. Her fingers rested gently on the keys, and she began to play. The melody that emerged was of devastating beauty. Notes that intertwined like lovers in a forbidden embrace. Harmonies that spoke of desire and despair, of love and madness. Daniel remained motionless, his hands gripping the back of a chair, tightly. Emily could feel the tension emanating from him, even without looking in his direction. The music filled the library, echoing between the ancient walls like a long-contained lament. When the last note dissipated in the air, the silence that followed was almost painful. Emily kept her hands on the keys, fearing to break the spell of the moment. "How?" Daniel's voice was hoarse with emotion. "How did you manage it?" Emily turned to face him, finding his eyes full of an emotion she couldn't name. "The music. It speaks to me. It always has." It's as if Beatrice had created not just a composition, but an entire language to express what her heart could not say in words. Daniel approached the piano, his steps hesitant. "There's more," he said, his voice low and intense. "Much more. Diaries, letters, dozens of compositions, all written during the years she was..." He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "Here." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in that story, in that music, in that man, that called to her like a siren's song. It was dangerous, she knew, but also irresistible. "How long will it take to decipher everything?" asked Daniel, now so close that she could feel the heat emanating from his body. "Weeks, perhaps months," replied Emily, her voice barely a whisper. "Each composition seems to tell a different part of the story." "Then you will come every day." It wasn't a question, but a statement. "Starting tomorrow." Emily knew she should consult her aunt and uncle first, that she should think more carefully about getting so deeply involved with the mysteries of the Blackwoods. But when her eyes met Daniel's again, she knew her decision was already made. "Yes," she answered simply. At that moment, a distant thunder echoed through the valley, making the library windows tremble slightly. Emily looked outside and saw dark clouds approaching rapidly. "The storm is coming," murmured Daniel, his gaze fixed on her. "You better go before it starts to rain." Emily rose from the piano, feeling strangely reluctant to leave. As she walked towards the door, she could feel Daniel's gaze following her every movement. "Until tomorrow, Mr. Blackwood," she said, turning one last time before leaving. "Until tomorrow, Miss Sullivan," he replied, his voice carrying an unspoken promise. When the black car took her back to St. Catherine's, the first drops of rain were beginning to fall. Emily rested her forehead against the cold window, her heart beating in a rhythm that echoed Beatrice's melody. Something had changed that morning, something fundamental and irreversible, and as the storm approached, bringing with it the smell of wet earth and unfulfilled promises, Emily knew, in some deep place in her soul, that her life would never be the same again. The days that followed established a new routine in Emily's life. Every morning, the same black car picked her up at St. Catherine's precisely at 8 o'clock. And every morning she felt her heart beat a little faster as she climbed the marble stairs of Blackwood Manor. The library had become her sanctuary. Among the ancient bookshelves and the grand piano, Emily spent hours deciphering Beatrice's scores, discovering in each note a new layer of that extraordinary woman's story. Daniel was always present, sometimes sitting silently in his leather armchair, other times walking restlessly among the bookshelves as if searching for something beyond the books. On that specific morning, Emily was particularly absorbed in a composition that seemed more of an outpouring than music. The notes were intense, almost violent in their expression of anguish. Her fingers danced over the piano keys, translating Beatrice's pain into sounds that echoed through the library like silent screams. She wrote this on the night she was forbidden to see Lawrence. Daniel's voice emerged close to the piano, making Emily jump slightly. She hadn't heard him approach. "Lawrence?" she asked, her fingers still resting on the keys. Daniel leaned on the piano, his green eyes fixed on a distant point. The man she fell in love with, a gardener, completely inappropriate for a Blackwood, according to my great-grandfather. Emily felt a tightness in her chest. The story was beginning to make sense, the intensity of the compositions, the veiled desperation in each note. What happened to him? Died in mysterious circumstances, Daniel replied, his voice laden with an ancient bitterness. Some say he was murdered, others that he died of grief. Beatrice was never the same after that. Emily looked at the score with new eyes. It wasn't just music she was reading, it was the testament of a shattered soul. "Is that why you came back?" she asked softly. "To understand what happened?" Daniel turned to her, and Emily felt herself plunging into the dark green of his eyes. There was something there, pain, guilt, desire, that made her shiver. "Perhaps," he replied, "or perhaps I'm just running from my own destiny." Before Emily could ask what he meant, Mrs. Victoria entered the library, carrying a tray with tea and cookies. "I thought you might want a snack," said the housekeeper, her perceptive gaze alternating between the two. Emily thanked her and helped herself to a cup of tea. Her hands trembled slightly and she prayed no one would notice. Daniel politely declined and walked to the window, his silhouette cut against the afternoon light like a Renaissance painting. "I found something interesting this morning," he said, after a moment of silence. "In the attic. Would you like to see?" Emily nodded, curious. She followed Daniel through the corridors of the manor to a narrow staircase that led to the top floor. The attic was an immense space, covered with white sheets protecting old furniture and dusty boxes. "Here," Daniel stopped in front of a carved wooden chest. It belonged to Beatrice. Carefully he lifted the lid. The smell of time and memories filled the air. Inside the chest were old dresses, yellowed letters, and at the bottom, a wooden music box with intricate carvings. "Play it," Daniel whispered, so close that Emily could feel his warm breath on her neck. With trembling fingers, she turned the small golden handle. A soft, melancholic melody filled the air, the same one she had found in one of Beatrice's scores. "It's the Waltz of Lost Love," murmured Emily, instantly recognizing the composition. "She wrote it for Lawrence." "How do you know?" Daniel asked, his voice husky with emotion. "It's here." Emily pointed to the small marks engraved in the wood of the box. "They're the same notes, the same pattern she used in her scores." Daniel moved even closer to see, and Emily felt her body react to his proximity. The heat emanating from him, his discreet but intensely masculine perfume, the contained energy that seemed to vibrate between them. All this made her feel dizzy, vulnerable. "You are extraordinary," he murmured, his eyes meeting hers. "How do you see so much?" Emily felt the blush rise up her neck. "It's just music. It speaks to me." "It's not just that," Daniel insisted, his hand lightly touching her arm. "You have something special, Emily. Something that makes me—" He stopped, abruptly, as if he had said too much. He stepped back a few steps, running his hand through his dark hair in a gesture of frustration. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice returning to the controlled tone of always. "It's getting late. We should go down." Emily felt the moment slip away, like water between her fingers. She followed Daniel back to the library in silence, her heart beating erratically in her chest. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of musical notes and furtive glances. When the sun began to set, painting the library with tones of amber and gold, Emily knew it was time to leave. "Tomorrow we'll continue," said Daniel, standing by the door as she gathered her things. "Yes," replied Emily, hesitating for a moment. "Mr. Blackwood." "Daniel," he interrupted her. "Please call me Daniel." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Daniel?" she repeated softly. "Is there something I'm not seeing? Something about Beatrice I should know?" A shadow passed across his face. "There are many things about the Blackwoods that no one should know, Emily. Some truths are too dangerous." "Even so, I want to understand," she insisted, surprising herself with her boldness. Daniel took a step towards her, and for a moment Emily thought he might touch her. But he only looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "Be careful what you wish to understand," he murmured. "Some answers can change everything." That night, back at St. Catherine's, Emily couldn't sleep. Beatrice's melodies mingled, in her mind with Daniel's deep voice, creating a symphony of unfulfilled desires and secrets yet to be discovered. In her simple room, she opened the medallion she always carried with her. The Latin inscription glowed in the moonlight. "Amor vincit omnia," love conquers all. But as she observed Blackwood Manor through the window, Emily wondered if any love would be strong enough to overcome the shadows that seemed to envelop that family. The following days brought more discoveries. Among Beatrice's scores, Emily began to find small notes, isolated words that seemed to form a musical diary of her descent into madness. "He is here," said one of them, written hastily in the margin of a particularly turbulent score. "I can hear him in the garden at night. Lawrence is not dead, they lie." Emily showed the notation to Daniel, who examined it with a somber expression. "She began to have hallucinations after Lawrence died," he explained. "She said she saw him in the garden, that he touched her window at night. In the end, no one knew if it was really madness or if what?" Emily asked when he didn't continue. Daniel looked at her for a long time before answering. "Or if there was some truth to her visions. This manor holds many secrets, Emily. Some of them still haunt the living." As if to confirm his words, a sudden wind blew through the library, making the curtains dance and the scores fly off the table. Emily hurried to collect them, and when she bent down to pick up the last sheet, her fingers touched Daniel's. The contact, though brief, sent an electric current through her entire body. When their eyes met, Emily saw in him the same desire that burned in her own heart, a dangerous, forbidden desire, but as inevitable as gravity. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice husky. "It's not safe." "Why?" Emily asked, without moving. "Because—" Daniel hesitated, his eyes fixed on her lips. "Because there are things in me, Emily, things I can't control. And you are too much light for my darkness." Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps in the corridor made them separate quickly. Mrs. Victoria entered the library, her disapproving look saying more than words. "Your aunt and uncle called, Miss Sullivan," said the housekeeper. "They're concerned about the time." Emily nodded, feeling like a teenager caught in the act. She hurriedly gathered her things, avoiding looking at Daniel. "Until tomorrow," she murmured, heading for the door. "Emily," Daniel's voice made her stop. "Be careful on the way back. The nights are not always safe around here." There was something in his tone that made her shiver, not with fear but with anticipation, as if he knew something that was about to happen. The way back to St. Catherine's never seemed so long. Through the car window, Emily watched the shadows lengthen in the valley, transforming the familiar landscape into something mysterious and seductive. When she arrived home, she found her aunt and uncle in the living room, waiting with worried expressions. "You're staying until very late at the manor, dear," said Aunt Martha, her tone gentle but firm. "The work is more complex than we imagined," Emily explained, feeling guilty for not telling the whole truth. "And Mr. Blackwood?" asked Uncle Joseph, his voice laden with suspicion. "Has he been behaving appropriately?" Emily felt the blush rise to her cheeks. "Yes, of course, he is a perfect gentleman." But that night in her dreams, Daniel was far from being a gentleman. He chased her through the corridors of the manor, his touch burning like fire on her skin, his kisses tasting of desire and danger. Emily woke up breathless, her body trembling with unfulfilled desire. Through the window, the full moon bathed the valley in silver light, and in the distance Blackwood Manor stood like a dark promise. Somewhere, a clock struck midnight, and Emily swore she heard, carried by the wind, the melody of Beatrice's music box, the waltz of lost love, playing its song of desire and destiny. The morning arrived filled with heavy clouds, as if the sky itself sensed the storm forming in Emily's heart. During breakfast at St. Catherine's, she barely touched her cup of tea, her mind lost in memories of the previous night's dream and the anticipation of another day at Blackwood Manor. "Emily," Aunt Martha's voice brought her back to reality. "Is everything all right, dear? You seem distant." "Yes, Aunt," Emily forced a smile. "Just thinking about Beatrice's scores. There's still so much to decipher." "And how much longer will this take?" Uncle Joseph interjected, his tone harsher than usual. "The rumors in town are growing. People are talking." "Talking about what?" Emily asked, feeling her heart quicken. "Talking that it's not appropriate for a single young woman to spend so much time alone with that man," he answered, his face reddening with discomfort. Emily felt the blood freeze in her veins. "Daniel, Mr. Blackwood has been a perfect gentleman," she defended herself, trying to keep her voice steady. "And there are always other people in the house, Mrs. Victoria, the servants." "Even so," Aunt Martha gently intervened, "perhaps we should establish a more appropriate schedule for your visits." Before Emily could respond, the familiar sound of the car arriving saved her from the discussion. She quickly said goodbye to her aunt and uncle and stepped out into the humid morning air. During the journey to the manor, raindrops began to dot the car windows like tears from the sky. Emily watched the blurred landscape, feeling a growing uneasiness in her chest. The rumors in town worried her, not for herself, but for what they might mean for Daniel. Upon arriving at the manor, she found Mrs. Victoria more agitated than normal. "Mr. Blackwood is not feeling well this morning," informed the housekeeper, leading Emily to the library. "He asked not to be disturbed, but said you may continue your work." Emily felt a pang of concern. "Is he ill?" "The master has his moments," replied Victoria vaguely. "It's better not to ask questions." Alone in the library, Emily tried to concentrate on the scores, but her mind kept returning to Daniel. What did Mrs. Victoria mean by his moments? Was there something more to the Blackwood mysteries beyond the tragedies of the past? The hours dragged on. The rain now fell heavily, beating against the library windows like ghostly fingers. Emily was absorbed in a particularly complex score when a sound made her raise her head, heavy and irregular footsteps in the corridor. The door opened and Daniel entered, looking paler and more haggard than she had ever seen him. His eyes, normally so penetrating, were clouded with pain. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice hoarse. "I should have had it cancelled." "What happened?" Emily stood up, concerned. "Can I help?" "No." The harshness in his voice made her step back. Daniel closed his eyes, as if trying to control himself. "I'm sorry, I just need a moment." He stumbled to his usual armchair and collapsed into it, his breathing heavy. Emily, ignoring his previous protest, approached him. "At least let me get you some water," she offered softly. Daniel grabbed her wrist when she made to move away. His touch was feverish. "It's not something water can cure," he murmured. "It's genetic, the same thing that killed my father and my grandmother." Emily felt her heart tighten. "A disease?" "A curse," he laughed without humor. "The Blackwoods have always been cursed in one way or another. This is just the most recent manifestation. But there must be treatment, doctors." "There is." Daniel released her wrist gently. "But some destinies cannot be avoided, only postponed." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. Without thinking, she extended her hand and touched his face, feeling the stubble rasp against her palm. "Don't cry for me," he murmured, leaning into her touch. "I don't deserve your tears." "Why did you really come back?" she asked, her voice just a whisper. "Why now?" Daniel looked at her for a long time before answering, "Because I wanted to understand. Beatrice, she was also sick. Not in the same way, but there was something in her blood, something that consumed her from within. When I found her scores, I thought there might be a connection. And is there? Maybe. In her last compositions, she wrote about visions, about pains that no one else could see, as if her body was turning against itself." Emily remembered. The notations in the margins of the scores, the chaotic notes that seemed to scream with pain. "But that wasn't all that killed her, was it?" she asked softly. "No," Daniel confirmed. "It was love, or the lack of it. After Lawrence died, she simply gave up, stopped eating, sleeping. She composed day and night, as if music was the only thing keeping her alive." A thunderclap shook the library windows, making Emily start. Daniel held her hand, which still rested on his face. "You should go," he said. "The storm is getting worse." "I don't want to leave you like this." Emily, her name on his lips, sounded like a prayer and a curse. "You don't understand the danger. I'm not a man who can offer a future to anyone, especially someone like you. And what if I'm not looking for a future?" The words escaped before she could contain them. "What if I just want the present?" Daniel's eyes darkened with desire and anguish. For a moment, Emily thought he might kiss her. But then another spasm of pain crossed his body, making him bend forward. "Please," he gasped. "Go now. I don't want you to see me like this." Mrs. Victoria chose that moment to enter the library, carrying a tray with medications. "Miss Sullivan," she said firmly, "the car is waiting." Emily reluctantly moved away from Daniel, her heart torn between the desire to stay and respect for his request. "I'll return tomorrow," she promised. "No," Daniel's voice was weak, but determined. "Not tomorrow. I need time." "How much time?" "I will send for you when it's safe," he answered, without looking at her. Emily left the library feeling as if she were leaving part of her soul behind. The storm now roared outside, transforming the afternoon into premature night. In the car during the return to St. Catherine's, she pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the lightning tear the sky. Daniel's words echoed in her mind, about curses, diseases, and forbidden loves. That night, alone in her room, Emily touched her medallion and prayed, not the usual prayers she had learned at St. Catherine's, but a desperate plea to the universe to spare Daniel from the fate that seemed to pursue his family. Outside, the storm continued, and in the gusts of wind, she could swear she heard Beatrice's melodies, no longer just sad, but laden with a warning she still couldn't comprehend. The following days were an exercise in patience and anguish. There was no news from the manor, not a word from Daniel. Emily continued her routine at St. Catherine's, teaching music to the children, embroidering vestments, watering her lavender. But each movement seemed empty, mechanical. At night, she pored over the copies of the scores she had brought home, searching in Beatrice's notes for some clue, some answer to the mysteries surrounding the Blackwoods. It was on one of these nights, when the new moon made the sky especially dark, that Emily found something intriguing. Among Beatrice's last compositions, there was a sequence of notes that repeated, not as music but as a code. "The blood carries the key," said an almost illegible notation in the margin. "The music is only the beginning." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something there, something important that she still couldn't fully see, but before she could explore deeper, she heard urgent knocks on her door. It was Mrs. Victoria, her normally impassive face marked with concern. "Mr. Blackwood requests your presence immediately," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's urgent." Emily looked at the clock. It was past midnight. Her aunt and uncle would certainly not approve, but something in the housekeeper's tone made her understand that this was greater than social conventions. "Give me a moment to change," she replied, her heart already accelerating at the prospect of seeing Daniel again. As she hurriedly dressed, Emily couldn't help but think of Beatrice's words, "The blood carries the key." What deeper secrets did Blackwood Manor still hold? And why, despite all the warnings, did she feel that her destiny was inexorably intertwined with Daniel's? The night awaited her, dark and full of promises, as the black car once again climbed the hill toward the manor. Emily clutched her medallion, feeling that she was about to discover truths that would change her life forever. The manor had never seemed so imposing as on that moonless night. The windows gleamed like feverish eyes in the darkness, and the wind whispered among the ancient trees in the garden, bringing with it the sweetish perfume of night roses. Emily climbed the marble steps with her heart racing, following Mrs. Victoria through the silent corridors. They didn't go to the library this time. The housekeeper led her through a part of the manor that Emily had never visited before, an older wing, where the portraits of the Blackwoods seemed even more austere and accusatory. "He's in Beatrice's room," informed Mrs. Victoria, stopping before a double-carved oak door. No one had entered here for decades until tonight. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Why now? He had a discovery. The housekeeper hesitated. "Miss Sullivan, please be gentle with him. The master is not in his normal state." Before Emily could ask what that meant, the door opened. The room beyond was immense, with floor-to-ceiling windows now covered by heavy velvet curtains. Candles had been lit in various candelabras, creating dancing shadows on the walls covered with ancient tapestries. In the center of the room stood a white grand piano, its keys yellowed by time. And beside it, Daniel. He was different, not just in his pallor or sunken eyes, but in something deeper, more disturbing. His hands trembled slightly as he leafed through a sheaf of papers. "Emily," his voice was hoarse, as if he had spent hours in silence. "You need to see this." She approached cautiously, noting that the papers were old, the handwriting elegant and familiar, the same as on the scores. "Beatrice's diary," Daniel explained, without looking at her. "I found it hidden inside the piano, along with this." He extended something small and bright, a crystal vial containing an amber liquid. "What is this?" "The cure," he answered, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "Or the curse. I'm not sure which yet." Emily carefully took the diary, her eyes running over the yellowed pages. Beatrice's words jumped from the paper like silent screams. "The blood of the Blackwoods is poisoned by generations of sins, but I have found a way to purify it. Lawrence showed me the path. The ancient herbs, the forgotten rituals. Music is only part of the cure. The true remedy lies in sacrifice, in love that transcends death." "She wasn't crazy," Daniel murmured, coming so close that Emily could feel the heat emanating from his body. "She was trying to save us. All of us." "The disease," Emily began, but Daniel interrupted her. "It's not just a disease. It's a curse, passed from generation to generation. It starts with the visions, then come the pains, and finally—" He stopped, his voice failing. "Finally, we lose not just the body, but the soul." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. "And this vial?" "According to the diary, it's the last dose she prepared, the only one that survived." Daniel held the vial against the candlelight, watching the liquid dance. "But there's a price. There's always a price." "What price?" "A life for another. A sacrifice of true love." He laughed bitterly. "Beatrice tried to use her own sacrifice to save Lawrence, but he died before she could complete the ritual. The poison consumed her after that, transforming her music into madness." Emily felt her heart tighten. The pieces were starting to fit together. The obsessive compositions, the frantic notations, the growing desperation in the last scores. "Why are you showing me this now?" she asked softly. Daniel finally looked at her, his green eyes shining with an almost supernatural intensity in the candlelight. "Because I'm dying, Emily," he answered, his voice barely a whisper, "faster than I imagined. And because—" He hesitated, taking a step toward her. "Because you changed everything." "How so?" "Since you arrived, since you started playing Beatrice's music, something awakened. The pains diminished, the visions became clearer. It's as if—" He touched her face gently. "As if you were the key," she mentioned. "Music, in its purest form. Emily felt her entire body tremble under his touch. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," he answered, letting his hand fall. "Everything. I don't know anymore. I only know that I cannot allow you to become more deeply involved in this madness." "That's not for you to decide," Emily responded with a firmness that surprised her. "If there's a chance to save you—" "No," Daniel's voice echoed through the room. "Don't you understand? The price is a life. I will not sacrifice anyone else for this curse. And if someone wants to offer themselves freely—" "The pie." Words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Daniel looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, no longer just the innocent young woman from St. Catherine's, but a woman capable of choosing her own destiny. "No," he said, finally, his voice hoarse. "I cannot allow that. You are young, pure, you have your whole life ahead of you. I am just another doomed Blackwood. And if I say that my life makes no sense without you—" The words escaped before Emily could contain them. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel looked at her with a mixture of desire and despair. That made her heart ache. "Emily," he began, but was interrupted by a sharp, penetrating sound. The white piano, untouched for decades, emitted a single clear note, as if invisible fingers had touched its keys. The vial in Daniel's hand momentarily glowed, the amber liquid pulsing as if it had a life of its own. "She's here," Emily whispered, feeling the air in the room suddenly become denser. "Beatrice—" As if in a trance, she approached the piano. Her hands rested on the yellowed keys, and without thinking, she began to play. The melody that emerged was none of the composition she knew. It was something new, something ancient, something that seemed to come from her own soul. Daniel watched, hypnotized, as the room seemed to come alive around them. The curtains moved without wind, the candles flickered, and on the walls the shadows danced to the rhythm of the music. "The ritual," he murmured, his eyes wide. "The music is part of it." Beatrice wrote. She wrote that a melody born of true love was needed to complete the cure. Emily continued playing, her hands moving of their own volition over the keys. Tears ran freely down her face, but she barely noticed them. All that existed was the music, the moment, and the love that threatened to shatter her heart. Suddenly, a sharp pain crossed Daniel's chest, making him stagger. The vial escaped from his hands, falling in slow motion toward the marble floor. Emily saw it all happen as in a dream, her hand leaving the piano keys, her body moving without thinking, her fingers closing around the vial an instant before it shattered. The silence that followed was absolute. "It can't be a coincidence," Daniel murmured, his voice trembling. "How you are exactly as she described, salvation through music, through love." "Then let me help," Emily implored, holding the vial against her chest. "Let me choose." Daniel looked at her for a long time, his face a mask of conflict and desire. Finally, he took a step toward her. "If you stay," he said, his voice low and intense, "there will be no turning back. The Blackwoods do not let their secrets escape easily. And the town will never forgive." "I don't care about the town," replied Emily. "I only care about you." At that moment, as if responding to her words, the vial in her hands began to glow with its own light, pulsing like a living heart. The choice was made. The ritual had begun. And somewhere between the world of the living and the dead, Beatrice Blackwood watched, waiting to see if this time, finally, love would be strong enough to break the curse. The news spread through the town like wildfire. Emily Sullivan had not returned to St. Catherine's that night. The whispers began even before dawn, when Aunt Martha, in tears, knocked on every door, asking for news of her niece. Soon the story was on everyone's lips. The sweet and modest music teacher had succumbed to the same fate as Beatrice Blackwood so many years before. At the manor, time seemed to flow differently. Emily, still dressed in her clothes from the previous night, watched the sunrise through the immense windows of Beatrice's room. The vial with the amber liquid rested on the white piano, its light now soft and pulsing like a distant star. "There's no turning back now," said Daniel, standing by the door. He seemed simultaneously stronger and more vulnerable than ever. The entire town must be in an uproar. Emily turned to face him, feeling a new strength growing within her. I don't care what they think. We need to understand how to complete the ritual. She turned her attention to Beatrice's diary, which she had spent the night studying. The pages were full of cryptic notations, musical formulas intertwined with ancient recipes and prayers in Latin. Here, she pointed to a specific passage, she mentions 3 necessary elements: the music born of true love, which we already have, the elixir which is in the vial, and, she hesitated, a voluntary blood sacrifice during the new moon. Daniel approached, his steps heavy on the marble floor. The next new moon is in 3 days. Time enough for us to prepare, Emily replied, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. At that moment, the door opened violently. Mrs. Victoria entered, her normally impassive face marked with concern. Her aunt and uncle are here, she announced. With the town priest, they're demanding to see Miss Sullivan. Emily felt her heart tighten. Daniel stepped forward, protectively placing himself between her and the door. Tell them she's indisposed, he began, but Emily interrupted him. No, I need to face them. I'm no longer a child to hide away. The meeting took place in the library, that place that had witnessed the birth of their love. Uncle Joseph, Aunt Martha, and Father Anthony waited, their faces a mixture of concern and disapproval. Emily, dear, Aunt Martha advanced with open arms, but stopped upon seeing the determined expression on her niece's face. How could you? Uncle Joseph exploded, his face red with indignation. Spend the night here alone with him. The scandal, the shame. There is no shame in true love, Emily replied, surprising everyone with her firmness. Love? Father Anthony stepped forward, his hands crossed over his chest. Or seduction? The Blackwoods have a long history of destroying innocent lives. Don't speak of what you don't understand. Daniel entered the library, his presence filling the room. Emily is here by her own choice. Choice? Uncle Joseph laughed bitterly. What choice can an innocent young woman have before a man like you? We know your reputation, Blackwood. The scandals, the mysterious deaths in your family. Enough! Emily's voice cut through the air like a whip. I didn't come to ask for permission or approval. I came to inform you of my decision. I will stay here with Daniel. This is madness, Aunt Martha sobbed. Emily, think of your reputation, your future. I am thinking of love, replied Emily softly. The same love that Beatrice felt for Lawrence, the same love that this manor has tried to bury so many times. Father Anthony narrowed his eyes. You speak like her now. You're bewitched, as Beatrice was. No, Emily smiled sadly. I'm more lucid than ever. At that moment, a gust of wind swept through the library, making the curtains dance and papers fly. The piano in the corner emitted a sharp note, as if played by invisible hands. Aunt Martha made the sign of the cross, her eyes wide with fear. This place is cursed. It's not a curse. Emily walked to the piano, her fingers brushing the keys. It's redemption. And I was chosen to complete it. Chosen? Uncle Joseph advanced, his face contorted with anger. By whom? By him, he pointed at Daniel. Or by some evil spirit that inhabits this house? By love, replied Emily simply. The same. Love that you taught me to value. Love that transcends conventions, that defies time, that has the power to heal. Her words seemed to touch something in Aunt Martha, who looked at her with new eyes. Emily, do you truly love him? With every fiber of my being, she replied, her eyes meeting Daniel's. A heavy silence fell over the library. Father Anthony was the first to break it. If you insist on this madness, the church cannot help you. You'll be alone. She will never be alone, Daniel spoke, approaching Emily. I will protect her with my life. Your life? Uncle Joseph laughed bitterly. For how long? Everyone knows you're sick, Blackwood, that you carry the same curse that destroyed your family. Emily felt Daniel stiffen beside her, but before he could respond, she took the floor. There is a cure, she said firmly, and we will find it together. Cure? Father Anthony looked at her with pity. There is no cure for sin, my child. "There is a cure for everything," Emily replied, "when there is enough love." Her words seemed to touch something deep in Aunt Martha, who took a hesitant step toward her. "Emily, if this is truly your wish—" "Martha," Uncle Joseph interrupted. "We cannot allow this. It's no longer our decision," replied her aunt softly, tears running down her face. "Our girl has grown up, and if she has found her destiny here, then let her be cursed with him." Uncle Joseph turned on his heels and marched out of the library. Father Anthony followed him after casting a final warning look. Only Aunt Martha remained, her eyes fixed on Emily. "Promise you'll be careful," she whispered. "I promise, Aunt." Emily embraced her gently. "And I promise that one day you'll understand." After everyone had departed, Emily and Daniel remained in silence in the library. The morning sun now came through the windows, bathing everything in a golden light that seemed to purify the air of the previous tension. "Are you sure?" Daniel finally asked, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "You just sacrificed everything for me." Emily turned to him, her face serene despite the unshed tears in her eyes. "I sacrificed nothing," she replied. "I merely chose what truly matters." At that moment, as if in response to her words, a soft melody began to play, not from the piano in the library, but from Beatrice's room upstairs. The music box had begun to play on its own, its ancient waltz echoing through the corridors of the manor like a blessing. Emily and Daniel looked at each other, understanding. The first test had been passed. Now, only 3 days remained until the new moon, 3 days to prepare the ritual that could save him or condemn them both. But in that moment, with Beatrice's music enveloping them like a protective mantle, nothing mattered beyond the love they had chosen to defend. The 3 days preceding the new moon transformed Blackwood Manor into a world apart, suspended between reality and dream. Emily and Daniel immersed themselves deeply in Beatrice's diaries, deciphering each notation, each musical symbol, each ancient formula that might help them complete the ritual correctly. Beatrice's room became their sanctuary. Emily spent hours at the white piano, her hands dancing over the keys as she tried to capture the essence of love in music. Daniel, when not prostrated by his episodes of pain, watched her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "I found something," said Emily that morning, her finger running down the yellowed page of the diary. Beatrice wrote about the importance of the ritual's location. It needed to be a place where love and music met perfectly. Daniel approached, his steps firmer than in recent days. Emily's proximity seemed to have a positive effect on his condition, as if her presence were a temporary balm for his disease. "The winter garden," he murmured. "That's where Lawrence used to play violin for her, hidden among the rose bushes." Emily looked up from the diary. "Does it still exist?" "Abandoned, like everything here. But yes, it's still standing." They descended together to the winter garden, a circular structure of glass and wrought iron attached to the manor. Years of neglect had transformed the place into a miniature jungle. Vines climbed up the metal columns, wild roses sprouted between the broken tiles, and an ancient fountain, long dry, served as a nest for birds. "It's perfect," Emily whispered, feeling the energy of the place. "We can feel their love here even after so much time." Daniel observed her with a mixture of adoration and fear. "Emily, there's still time to give up. What Beatrice tried, it was dangerous, deadly. More deadly than letting you die." She turned to him, her eyes shining with determination. "Don't ask me to give up, Daniel. Not now." He took a step toward her, his hands trembling slightly when they touched her face. "You are so much like her. Not in appearance, but in strength, in the capacity to love beyond reason. The difference is that we will succeed." Emily covered his hand with hers. "We have something they didn't have." "What?" "Time. Knowledge. And—" She hesitated, a soft blush tinting her cheeks. "And we're not trying to hide anything. Our love is exposed to the world by our own choice." As if to confirm her words, Excited voices reached them from the manor's gate. A group of townspeople had gathered, led by Father Anthony. "They're here to exorcise the house." Mrs. Victoria entered the winter garden, her face paler than normal. "They say Miss is possessed by Beatrice's spirit." Emily laughed softly, despite the gravity of the situation. If only they knew. "I'll send them away." Daniel made to leave, but Emily stopped him. "No, let them be. The more they try to stop us, the more strength they give to the ritual." "What do you mean?" Emily returned to the diary in her hands. Beatrice wrote about this. "The most powerful love is that which faces opposition. Each voice raised against it only increases its strength like wind blowing on embers." Daniel looked at her with renewed admiration. "You really believe this, don't you? That we can win?" "I believe in us," she replied simply, "and in music, and in the love that brought us here." The voices outside grew louder, now accompanied by the sound of prayers in Latin. Emily walked to the ancient fountain and ran her fingers along the marble edge. "We need to prepare this place," she said, more to herself than to Daniel. "Clean it, restore it, make the water flow again. The fountain is important. Beatrice mentioned something about waters that wash the cursed blood." "Emily?" Daniel approached from behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "Are you willing to sacrifice your own blood for me?" She turned in his arms, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. "My blood, my music, my soul, if necessary. Don't you understand yet? You are my choice, Daniel. My destiny." The kiss that followed was as inevitable as gravity. Daniel's lips found hers with a mixture of desperation and reverence, as if she were simultaneously his salvation and his downfall. Emily responded with all the love she held in her heart, letting the music she always heard in her soul transform into a symphony of desire and promise. When they separated, breathless, the world seemed different. The voices from the town had fallen silent, as if the universe itself respected the sanctity of that moment. 2 days, murmured Daniel, his forehead pressed against hers. 2 days until the new moon. Time enough, Emily replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her body. Mrs. Victoria can help us clean and prepare the garden, and She hesitated, a soft smile playing on her lips. I need to compose our music. Our music? Yes. We can't use Beatrice's compositions for the ritual. They carry the energy of her failure. We need something new, something ours. A music that tells our story, not hers. Daniel looked at her for a long time, as if trying to memorize every detail of her face. And if it doesn't work? Then we will have lived and loved. Fully, she replied with simplicity, and that's already more than many achieve in a lifetime. The rest of the day was dedicated to transforming the winter garden. Mrs. Victoria, despite her initial reservations, proved to be a valuable ally, organizing the servants to clean, repair, and restore the space. Emily alternated between helping with the cleaning and sitting at the piano in Beatrice's room, letting the music flow through her. The notes came naturally, as if they had just been waiting for the right moment to be born. At night, when exhaustion finally caught up with them, Emily and Daniel gathered in the library. The vial with the amber liquid rested between them on the ancient table, its light softly pulsing like a distant heart. Tell me about Lawrence, Emily asked softly. What was their love like? Daniel served 2 glasses of wine before answering. It was pure, devastating. He had nothing but his violin and his love for her, and for Beatrice that was more than enough. How did they meet? He came to work in the gardens after his father died, leaving the family in poverty. Beatrice heard him playing violin at dusk. He had taught himself in secret. The music united them even before they exchanged a word. Emily smiled, recognizing the pattern. Like us. Yes, Daniel took her hand on the table, their fingers intertwining naturally. Like us. But they lived in a less understanding time. Their love had to remain in the shadows, and that destroyed them. Among other things, Daniel hesitated, his thumb caressing the palm of her hand. The disease was already in the family then, though no one knew. Beatrice was the first to show symptoms, the pains, the visions. Lawrence helped her research ancient cures, forgotten rituals. And they found this one. Emily indicated the vial with a nod. Yes, but when the time came for the ritual, Lawrence was discovered in her room. My great-grandfather. Daniel stopped, his voice breaking. He was beaten and left to die in the garden. Beatrice found his body the next morning, among the rose bushes he had planted for her. Emily felt tears stream down her face, and she went mad with grief. Not immediately. First, she tried to complete the ritual alone, thinking she could bring Lawrence back. But without his love, without their music, Daniel shook his head. The ritual failed, and the poison that should have cured her ended up accelerating her madness. We won't make the same mistakes, Emily affirmed with conviction. Our love is in the open, our music is our own, and most importantly, she squeezed his hand. We're in this together, alive. Daniel pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. How can you be so sure? Because I can feel it, Daniel. In the music I'm composing, in the air of this house, even in the disapproving looks from the town. All of this strengthens us, prepares us. Beatrice and Lawrence were victims of their time. We will be the masters of ours. They remained embraced for a long moment, letting the silence of the night envelop them. Outside, the crescent moon began, its journey toward the eclipse that would mark the moment of the ritual. And on the white piano in Beatrice's room, the scores of Emily's new composition awaited, not a music of tragedy and loss, but a symphony of love and redemption, ready to break ancient curses and open the path to a new future. The eve of the new moon dawned with a dense fog covering the valley, as if nature itself wanted to hide Blackwood Manor from the accusing eyes of the town. Emily woke to the sound of music, not the usual melody from Beatrice's music box, but something different, more urgent. Following the sound, she found Daniel in the winter garden, now completely transformed. The ancient fountain had returned to life, its crystal water reflecting the diffused morning light. The rose bushes had been pruned and arranged, creating a natural circle around the central space where a black grand piano, not the white one from Beatrice's room, had been installed during the night. Where did it come from? She asked, approaching, as Daniel played a melody she didn't recognize. It was my mother's, he replied, his fingers dancing across the keys with surprising skill. I had it brought from storage in Boston. I thought we would need something truly our own for the ritual. Emily sat beside him on the piano bench, watching his hands move. I didn't know you played. I don't, Daniel laughed softly. Not normally, but this morning, I woke with this music in my head, as if someone were guiding me. Emily closed her eyes, letting the melody envelop her. It was simultaneously sad and hopeful, like a lament transforming into a prayer. It's perfect, she whispered. We can incorporate it into the ritual composition. At that moment, Mrs. Victoria hurriedly entered the winter garden. Forgive the interruption, she said, her face paler than normal, but there's something you need to see. They followed her to the manor's entrance. Our crowd had gathered at the gates, not just townspeople, but journalists, photographers, curious onlookers from all over. How did they find out? Daniel murmured, his posture immediately becoming tense. Father Anthony, replied the housekeeper. He called the press. They're calling it the Blackwood scandal, the young music teacher seduced by the cursed heir. No, Emily interrupted firmly. We will not allow them to turn our story into a circus. She walked to the window, observing the agitated crowd. Camera flashes fired incessantly, capturing the somber facade of the manor. We need to do something, said Daniel, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. I can call the police, disperse them. No, Emily turned to him, her eyes shining with a sudden idea. Let's give them a show. What do you mean? The ritual needs energy. The more intense, the better. And what could be more powerful than performing our cure before the very eyes that try to condemn us? Daniel looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. It would be dangerous. More dangerous than keeping everything secret like Beatrice and Lawrence? Emily took his hands, squeezing them firmly. Don't you see, this is what the ritual asks for? the courage to love openly, to defy not just the curse, but all the judgments of the world. Mrs. Victoria discreetly cleared her throat. "If I may, there's something else. You should know." She extended a local newspaper. On the front page, an old photograph showed a young woman sitting at a piano. The resemblance to Emily was striking. "Beatrice," Daniel whispered, taking the newspaper. Not just that, the housekeeper pointed to the date of the photo. It was taken on the day of her ritual, the last day she was seen with sanity. Emily studied the image carefully. Beatrice wore a simple white dress, her hands resting on the piano keys with an ethereal grace. But it was her eyes that captured attention. There was in them a mixture of determination and fear that Emily recognized in herself. "It's decided then," she said, her voice firm. "We'll perform the ritual in the winter garden with the doors open. Let them see, let them understand." "And if they try to stop us?" Daniel asked, though his tone suggested he had already accepted the idea. "They won't succeed," Emily smiled, a smile that carried all the strength of her conviction. "The music will keep them away." The rest of the day was dedicated to final preparations. Emily worked tirelessly on her composition, incorporating the mysterious melody that Daniel had played that morning. The result was a complex piece that seemed to contain all the nuances of their love, the sweetness of their first encounters, the forbidden passion, the pain of impending separation, and above all, the hope of redemption. Meanwhile, Daniel supervised the last details in the winter garden. The fountain was decorated with floating candles, its waters now mixed with essences of roses and lavender, the same flowers that Emily watered every morning at St. Catherine's in a life that now seemed so distant. As the day progressed, the crowd at the gates only grew. Reporters broadcast live, speculating about satanic rituals and demonic possessions. Father Anthony led prayers in Latin, his voice amplified by a megaphone. "Let them talk," Emily said when she saw Daniel observing the scene with concern. "Each word of theirs only adds power to our purpose." At nightfall, one last surprise awaited. Aunt Martha appeared alone at the gates, carrying something wrapped in ancient silk. "It was your mother's," she said when Emily received her in the library. "She wore it on her wedding day." The package revealed a simple but elegant white dress, made of delicate lace with small pearls sewn into the bodice. "Aunt," Emily felt tears in her eyes. "Does this mean that—" "It means that I understand," Martha embraced her tightly. "I don't fully approve, but I understand. Love, true love, is too rare to be denied." When night finally fell, Emily prepared in an almost sacred silence. Her mother's dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made for this moment. Her hair was left loose, framing her face with soft waves that captured the candlelight. "Are you ready?" Daniel asked when she descended the stairs. He wore a traditional black suit, his pallor accentuated by the contrast. "Since the first moment I played Beatrice's music," she replied, taking his hand. Together, they walked to the winter garden. The crowd at the gates momentarily fell silent upon seeing them. There was something almost supernatural in their appearance, as if they were characters from a dark fairy tale. The black piano waited, its keys gleaming under the candlelight. The fountain murmured softly, its water now tinged a soft pink by the petals floating on its surface. Emily took her place at the piano, her hands trembling slightly as they touched the keys. Daniel remained at her side, the vial with the amber liquid glowing in his hands like a fallen star. The new moon was about to rise, bringing with it the darkness necessary for the ritual. And as the first note echoed through the winter garden, carrying with it decades of love, pain, and hope, Emily knew there was no turning back. The night of the ritual had arrived, and with it, the promise of cure or eternal damnation. The winter garden of Blackwood Manor had never witnessed a night like that one. The candles flickered in the currents of air that entered through the open doors, their flames dancing to the rhythm of the music that flowed from Emily's fingers. The crowd at the gates had fallen silent, hypnotized by the melody that seemed to carry centuries of love and pain in each note. Emily played as if her own soul were connected to the piano, keys, her eyes closed, her body moving with the music she had composed. It was a symphony of love, Not just her love for Daniel, but all the forbidden loves that the manor had witnessed. The passion of Beatrice and Lawrence echoed in the lower notes, while her own story with Daniel shone in the higher octaves. Daniel remained at her side, the vial of amber liquid pulsing ever more intensely in his hands. His face was paler than ever, but his eyes shone with renewed strength. As the music grew in intensity, the roses in the garden began to move, as if touched by an invisible wind. The water in the fountain bubbled gently, its murmur harmonizing with the melody from the piano. "It's time," whispered Mrs. Victoria, who watched closely with Aunt Martha. Emily didn't need to be told. She could feel the moment coming, like a wave about to break. Her hands flew over the keys with even more urgency, weaving the melody that had been born from her heart with the ancient song that Daniel had played that morning. Then it happened. The first drop of blood fell on the piano keys, not from the ritual cut that was yet to come, but from Emily's nose. It was the sign that Beatrice had described in her diary, the moment when music and sacrifice became one. "Emily," Daniel's voice was tense with concern, "keep playing." The voice that came from Emily's lips didn't seem entirely her own. It was older, deeper, as if other voices mingled with hers. The crowd at the gates began to murmur. Camera flashes fired incessantly, capturing the moment when the supernatural and the mundane met. "In the name of God, stop this blasphemy," Father Anthony's voice sounded through his megaphone, but it was swallowed by the music that now seemed to come not just from the piano, but from the very walls of the manor. Emily continued playing, even as more drops of blood stained the white keys. Her hands moved of their own volition, guided by a force greater than herself. "Now, Daniel," she murmured, her voice trembling with the effort. With hands that no longer trembled, Daniel uncorked the vial. The amber liquid glowed like liquid fire in the candlelight. "Are you sure?" he asked one last time, his eyes fixed on her. Emily finally opened her eyes, meeting his. "I always have been." Without interrupting the music, she extended her left arm. Daniel, with a precision that seemed to come from centuries of genetic memory, made a small cut on her wrist, with an ancient dagger that had belonged to Beatrice. The blood that welled forth wasn't ordinary red. It had its own glow, as if the music Emily played had materialized in her veins. Drops fell into the fountain, tinting the water a supernatural pink. Daniel drank half of the liquid from the vial, his eyes never leaving hers. Then, with reverent care, he helped Emily drink the rest, his hands guiding the vial to her lips. In the brief moments when she could free them from the piano keys, the music reached its climax at the exact moment when the last drop of the elixir touched her lips. The blood from her wrist now flowed freely, mixing with the waters of the fountain in a pattern that resembled the musical notes in Beatrice's scores. Then the voices began. They weren't human voices, but neither were they entirely supernatural. It was as if the manor itself was singing, every board, every stone, every rose in the garden contributing to a harmony that transcended understanding. Emily felt her entire body vibrate with the music. Her hands continued playing, but now it was as if other hands guided hers, ancient hands, hands that had known the same love, the same pain, the same desire for healing. Daniel staggered, his eyes widening as the elixir began to take effect. His entire body glowed with an inner light, as if every drop of blood in his veins had transformed into the amber liquid from the vial. "Emily." His voice was simultaneously his and not his, carrying echoes of all the Blackwoods who had come before him. The crowd at the gates watched in stunned silence. Even Father Anthony had lowered his megaphone, his expression divided between horror and fascination. It was Aunt Martha who first noticed the change. "Look," she exclaimed, pointing to the sky through the glass roof of the winter garden. The new moon, which should have been invisible, shone with an impossible light, not silver as usual, but amber, the same color as the elixir, the same color that now pulsed in Daniel's veins. Emily felt the exact moment when everything changed. It was as if every note that had ever been played in that manner, every tear shed, every whispered promise of love, converged in a single instant of pure power. Her hands played the final chords of the composition at the exact moment when Daniel fell to his knees beside her. But it wasn't a fall of weakness, it was a fall of transformation. The light emanating from him grew until it became almost unbearable to look at. For a moment it seemed that other figures materialized in the garden, shadows of past lovers, echoes of ancient music, memories of love that transcended death. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The silence that followed was the deepest the manor had ever known. The candles all went out at the same time, leaving only the amber light that still gently pulsed in Daniel's veins. Emily, exhausted but conscious, finally removed her hands from the piano. Her wrist had stopped bleeding, leaving only a delicate scar in the shape of a musical note. "Daniel?" She called softly. He slowly raised his head. His eyes, when they met hers, were no longer those of a cursed man. The shadow of pain that had always clouded them had disappeared, replaced by a clarity she had never seen before. "It's over," he said, his voice clear and strong. "The curse. It's over." Emily fell into his arms, tears of joy and exhaustion running down her face. Daniel embraced her tightly, his body no longer trembling with pain, his heart beating strong and regular against her chest. The crowd at the gates erupted in a growing murmur. Flashes continued to fire, capturing the moment when the impossible became reality. "How do you feel?" asked Emily, touching his face with trembling fingers. "Alive," he replied simply. "Truly alive, for the first time in years." Aunt Martha approached them, silent tears running down her wrinkled face. "It's a miracle," she whispered. "No," Emily smiled, still in Daniel's arms. "It's love, the purest and truest love that exists. Mrs." Victoria, who observed everything with teary eyes, suddenly approached with something in her hands. Beatrice's music box. "I found this beside the white piano," she said. "It's different." When she opened the box, the melody that emerged was no longer the waltz of lost love. It was a new music, joyful, full of hope, a music of fulfilled love, of broken curses, of possible futures. Emily and Daniel looked at each other, understanding. Beatrice and Lawrence had finally found peace. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. It had opened the way for another love generations later to complete what they had begun. Blackwood Manor, for the first time in decades, seemed to breathe freely. The shadows that had for so long inhabited its corridors had dissipated, leaving only the golden light of dawn that began to filter through the glass roof of the winter garden. "And now?" asked Daniel, gently kissing the musical scar on Emily's wrist. "Now," she smiled, "we compose our own music, without curses, without secrets, just love." And as the sun rose over the valley, bathing the manor in new light, Emily and Daniel remained, embraced in the winter garden, their hearts beating in perfect harmony with the melody that continued to play softly in the music box, no longer a song of loss and tragedy, but a waltz of eternal love, finally fulfilled.